What is up, guys? Dzeeff here, and earlier this afternoon a huge update happened. Now, if you follow any of the judge groups, you probably knew this was coming, and basically there's a tournament policy for Yu-Gi-Oh! It used to be two separate documents, now it's one document, and there are a ton of changes on this. I know a lot of people don't read the tournament policy unless they're judges, but you really should read it, and especially in this case, there are so many updates, and there's a lot of cool stuff happening, a lot of good things, and a couple bad things that I want to talk about in today's video. What I'm going to go through is the 6 biggest changes you have to know if you're going to be playing at a Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament in the coming weeks. These changes are effective immediately, so if you want to avoid any bans or suspensions or disqualifications, you're going to want to stick around and see everything I have to say. There are a couple different areas that you can go to. Obviously, the tournament policy is completely public. Also, Konami wrote this awesome article. This is super cool. This got posted because they were talking that they weren't sure it was going to get posted on the same day as the policy documents were updated. Basically, this article, and I will link it in the description, is sort of a quick summary of all of the big changes out here. I'm actually going to go through the actual unabridged version of the policy documents so you guys can see exactly what I'm talking about. But if you just want like a quick summary, this is like the place to go. I'll put a link in the description. Really cool stuff. Super glad that they did this. They didn't have to do this. In the past when they've done policy document changes, they haven't done something like this. But the fact that there's so many changes in so many different areas that are going to affect players and judges alike, it's definitely super cool that they did this. Anyway, let's talk about change number 6, change number 1, hygiene. This is the one that I think a lot of people are sort of laughing about, but it's very important. So in hygiene, it now says, I'm not even sure this was a section. I don't think it actually used to be a section, but it says you are expected to be clean when you enter a tournament. Neglecting to wash or put on clean clothes contributes to an unpleasant atmosphere at the event, as the tournament can be crowded and the day can be long. Persons who neglect self-care to the point that they are negatively impacting the tournament may be asked to correct the issue in order to continue in the event. Here's the deal. Card games, video game players, everyone has sort of this bad rap of just being smelly people. In my experience, that's not always true. I would even say it's not even true in the majority of cases. I've been to a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments, and while it is true that you will walk past people and they just smell really funky, it's not all the time. I think people tend to exaggerate it. Maybe I think, personally, I think it gets worse at like local tournaments known for having smelly players. But as far as big events go, most of the people you run into, they're not going to be that bad. But to be fair, like to be completely honest here, I've gone to events with people. Like back, I used to travel with like acquaintances and stuff, just people from locals, random people that were like friends of friends of friends. And there's been times, multiple times, where I've gone to an event, like a 3-day event, and some of the people that I was with wouldn't change their clothes or shower for the entire 3 days, which to me blows my mind. I want to shower. I just want to be clean like as much as possible. So to me, that was always crazy. Obviously, I didn't say anything because I was like really young back then. But just in general, there are people out there, and if you're one of them, I mean, I don't know. Everyone has their own reasons, right? I'm sure everyone has their excuses for it, but really just wash yourselves. And the good news for the rest of us that do shower regularly and do brush our teeth and do use deodorant, we don't have to put up with people that don't shower and do all those things going forward, at least. Now, what does it mean when they say like they're going to be asked to correct the issue? Does that mean just putting on deodorant? As I don't think that's enough a lot of the times. I think you guys can know if you run past someone and it seems like they just reek, like all their clothing, their self, like their body odor, is a little bit of deodorant, is some Axe going to help that out? I think in a lot of cases, those people that morning probably did put on some ass, some ass. I think in a lot of cases, those people actually did put on some Axe already, so maybe that's not enough. And I think in many cases, you have to actually shower. You have to actually wash your clothes. Crazy idea, I know. But overall, I think this is a good change, and this is one I think people are reacting really positively to. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is in this tournament tiers section. Now, a lot of people that I talk to don't even realize that there are different tiers for tournaments. In the past, it was just tier 1 and tier 2 events. Basically, tier 2 was like regionals and above, and tier 1 was anything less than that. Now they've expanded it to 4 different tiers, which is super important because there's a very small line of text that I think a lot of people missed, because it's actually not on this page, it's on the next page. But basically what you have to understand is that in the past, regionals and YCSs were the same tier level, tier 2 events, but now they're different. Regionals are still tier 2, but YCSs and things like that, those are tier 3. And that's a big deal because when you scroll down in the time limit section, it mentions specifically that tier 1 and tier 2 events, they're always going to be 40 minutes. And that's sort of like goes along with like new time rules, but also they're all going to be 40 minutes. That's just what they are. But then it says Konami may choose to adjust the round lengths at certain tier 3 or 4 events. Any changes made to the tournament round will be announced before the start of the event. And then they go on to say, for single elimination playoff rounds, the time limit may be increased at the discretion of the head judge, but only if the increase is announced before the start of the playoff rounds. And here's the thing. If you guys have been paying attention to recent YCSs, a lot of them, a ridiculous amount of them, the final match has been determined by the new time rules. There simply is not enough time when you have people writing feature matches, and you already get like an extension for that, not for the live streams, I don't think, but for the written feature matches, you get an extension. That's sort of common knowledge, but overall, this is not enough time. There's so much pressure. You have, even when you do the live feature matches, you have judges with like the tablets and stuff that are writing down the card names so that the stream can see those cards and see what's in players' hands. It's not enough time, and it's really disappointing to have a super awesome back and forth game and then it just to sort of fall out at the very end, like the last second, it just loses to time. Maybe one person's done like 100 damage, maybe someone's done like 500 with an Aqua Dolphin. It doesn't really matter how much damage is done, as long as some damage is done, it's really anticlimactic. So what they're putting here is basically giving themselves the opportunity, if later on, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but they've given themselves the opening to increase the time at YCSs, increase the time in Top Cut, something along those lines, which would be very cool to see because people are pretty pissed about the time rules. But I'll talk about that in a later video. Next up, a quick note on sleeves. Now, the sleeve section for the most part hasn't changed. No, you can't double sleeve. It's in there. It doesn't matter why we think we can't double sleeve. The fact of the matter is, it's in the policy documents. You can't do it. But what's more important here is that they specifically are banning sleeves with holographic fronts. Now, I'm not going to call any companies out here. That's not the type of person I am. But what this means is that if you have any sleeves out there that make your cards look holographic on the front when they're not holographic, those are banned. There are sleeves out there that make cards look like dual terminal things. There's sleeves. Another thing that's banned on here is designs and artwork. A lot of like the sleeves that are meant for double sleeving will have designs on the front. You can't do that in tournaments anymore. And this actually caused a few issues. There's some issues with people, I think, with epilepsy, sort of getting when it's way too reflective. Now, why is that different from players that are using dual terminal cards? That's kind of up for debate. But the fact of the matter is that holographic sleeves are banned now. So there's no even, in the past, it wasn't in the policy documents. It was just sort of known that at most of those tournaments, the popular holographic sleeves, they weren't allowed, but that was at the head judge's discretion. Now it's right there in the policy documents. You don't have to ask the head judge if your dual terminal looking sleeves are legal. They're not. Next up, we're going to talk about substances. We're going to talk about some drugs. And the reason that we're going to talk about this is because, remember when I made that video that was like 5 things you can't do at Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments? And one of the things that you can't do is you can't show up drunk, you can't show up high. But I got a ton of comments from you guys. And then the first time people commented like really mean things on the first one, but then I clarified in the second one, it just means that you can't do it. That's what it comes down to. It's not my personal like feelings. I don't really care. But to Konami, they care about that a lot. But what a lot of people pointed out on something that I wish I would have brought up in that video, what happens if you need to take them for medical reasons? Obviously, things like pot are prescribed to people that are having issues, and even things like Adderall in the hands of someone that needs Adderall. Like, you obviously can't just go in a tournament without using it, but it's more so for the people that don't need that substance. They're not prescribed that, and it wasn't in the policy documents before this update what those people could do. Now it's in there, so it says right here explicitly, prescription medicine may only be bought to/used at events by the person for whom it is prescribed. So if you are prescribed any medication, you can use those at an event. I think that is an excellent change. I think it was always like that. I'm not 100% sure, but now it's actually in the policy documents. Because if you remember in that last video, because I even put like a screenshot of the policy documents in that video that I was talking about, I even put there because there was that screenshot that literally just said you can't use any substances, you can't be high on any substance or intoxicated at all. And a lot of people were just like, well, they're my prescription, what do I do? So this is sort of a way of clarifying that. There's also some stuff in here, and I don't really know. It's a little too wordy for me to understand, so I think you'd still want to know at a regional, but there are some issues, and I've been hearing some talks about issues in states where weed is legal. Is that banned from tournaments? Is that not banned from tournaments? And my state just had pot go legal, and I'm not really sure of like the rules or anything, but you'll definitely want to look into what your own state's rules are. Maybe ask some judges in your area, what are the rules on being high at events? I don't really know. I would assume they're the same of being like drunk at events, which you can't can't do, even though that's legal everywhere. But overall, I'm not entirely sure on that ruling. It doesn't really pertain to me too much, but if you're someone that does like to smoke weed recreationally, maybe ask a judge before you show up to the event high and get disqualified. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but I also don't know if it's not going to happen. So maybe just check with your judges in whatever area that you're going to play in. Just make sure they're from your state so they know the laws from wherever you're from. Next up, private knowledge. And public versus private knowledge is always something that's been talked about, but there's some sort of debate about how much can you bluff someone? How much can you rush someone? And there's been some talks in the past about, well, are you allowed to just reveal your hand to your opponent during their turn to tell them that you have no hand traps? Or are you allowed to say, I don't have Ash Blossom, just continue your plays, only for you to Ash Blossom? Where does it go between cheating and bluffing? And this section is super important because it actually clarifies some of those questions. So it says, examples, a duelist may not reveal that he is honest in his hand unless he is legally activating the card at the time. This is a pretty big deal, and it is a big deal because you can also read here, a duelist may not reveal a set mirror force unless he's legally activating the card at a time. A duelist may not reveal a card in his deck to the opponent unless an effect requires you to do so. That's a lot of stuff, but it kind of comes along the lines of these awkward situations that sometimes happen. They didn't happen too often, but sometimes it would just be like, you'd hear some players say like, if you reveal Twin Twisters, I'll just scoop right now, and they're trying to just like go to the next game. And then if their opponent reveals the Twin Twisters, and it's like, okay, what if your opponent now, or what if the other guy just doesn't scoop anymore because they don't legally, like, they didn't sign a contract saying if you show Twin Twisters, like, they have to scoop. Now it's just not allowed. That's just how it goes. Also, it is worth mentioning the last example on here, a duelist cannot ask to look at one of the opponent's face down cards even if that card was face up on a previous turn. An example of this would be like if you summon Altergeist Marionetter and set Altergeist Protocol, if your opponent asks like later on, like when their turn starts, like what does that card do, your opponent can sort of ask a judge what Altergeist Protocol does, but you don't have to flip up the card and show it to them for them to read. The judge can sort of bring that up. So I think that was always in there, but it's worth mentioning now. It's in the example section. Really good stuff for players that are looking to play cards like Altergeist Marionetter. Lots of cards do that though. Anything that you like reveal and then you put face down, Scrap Iron Scarecrow, I guess, would sort of counter that. Not that anyone really plays that, but any sort of card like that. You don't have to tell your opponent which cards. I know a lot of times you'll see people doing, they'll be like, which cards of yours do I know? And it's like, okay, do you have to answer that? Like if you search twice and you set like 3 cards, do you have to flip all of them face up? Do you have to reveal them? And the answer, at least with the news policy documents, is no. And that brings us to the 6th and probably most important change on this entire document. Maybe if you're a judge, you probably have a different opinion, but this one is a big deal and essentially makes a very popular card completely useless, or perhaps, I guess it hasn't seen much play recently. But anyway, we're talking about card/hand/deck verification. This is a section that basically talks about when you have to verify cards to your opponent, when you have to verify cards to the judge, something along those lines. And there's a huge thing in here that already, I mean, most of the stuff I've talked about has received sort of positive feedback from the community. People seem really happy about a lot of those changes. However, this one in particular, people are kind of freaking out about, and I think it's warranted because it's a pretty big change. So in this verification section, there's an example given that completely alters not only how a card is used, but also potentially just how the game is played in a lot of different scenarios. It's this second to last example, and it says Duelist A activates Mind Crush and declares Effect Failure. Duelist B says she does not have Effect Failure in her hand. Duelist A does not get to see Duelist B's hand to verify, which is a huge departure from how that card previously worked. And in how it previously worked was your opponent would discard as many copies of that card that they had in their hand. If they discarded enough copies so that all possible copies were public knowledge. So for example, in this case, if you're calling Effect Failure and she discards like 2 Effect Failures out of her hand and there's 1 Effect Failure already engraved, well now all the Effect Failures are public knowledge, so you don't have to verify the hand. Same thing goes if you discarded like 1 Monster Reborn or 1 Soul Charge. However, if you discarded just 1 copy of Effect Failure and there were no other copies anywhere in public knowledge, your opponent had to reveal their hand to prove that they didn't have any other copies of Effect Failure. But here's the thing, not only can you not verify the hand, like not only does your opponent not have to reveal it, Duelist A cannot call a judge to verify Duelist B's hand unless there is supportable evidence their opponent may be cheating or that they may be a valid deck-related issue. The cases that they're talking about there aren't you just think that they happen to have that card. It's they searched the card earlier, haven't played it, and now suddenly they're like, yeah, I don't have that in my hand. Like if they went Nekroz Librionic to add Trishula, they activated like Nekroz Mirror, and you Mind Crush the Nekroz Trishula, you know that they have it in their hand, so if they say that like, oh, it's not in my hand, like that's obviously wrong. But here's the deal with this and where it does matter, and where really, I'm going to be completely honest here, I agree with a lot of the changes on this policy document. As many people have stated, this change only helps cheaters and only punishes sort of clean players. And as a clean player, that sort of makes me feel bad. It makes me feel like I probably shouldn't play Mind Crush ever again. Here's why. Let's say on my turn, I activate Mind Crush and call Effect Veiler. My opponent says, I don't have that card in my hand, sorry. I now have to discard a card out of my hand, which obviously is not something that I want to do, and then I pass to my opponent. Now here's the thing, my opponent's going to draw a card for turn, right? Well, what if after they draw a card and shuffle their hand, they suddenly normal summon an Effect Veiler, and I'm just like, hey, wait a second, I Mind Crushed an effect on, like, oh yeah, I drew it for turn. It's like, did they draw it for turn or did they just cheat me? Alternatively, if your opponent has multiple copies in their hand, they no longer have to verify if they have multiple copies. So if my opponent calls like Altergeist Multifaker and I have 2 copies of Multifaker, if I was a scummy player, and there's not a lot of scummy players out there, but there are some, and if I was one of those players, I could just say, oh yeah, I got a Multifaker right here, let me put that in the graveyard. My turn comes around, I flip Protocol, I special summon the other Multifaker that was in my hand, and while obviously this shouldn't be an issue in many cases because most people you're going to play against are clean players, some of them aren't going to be. There is banned players for a reason. They don't get banned by accident. They get banned because they cheated or any number of other reasons. This seems like a really, really bad change, and I hope they revert it. These policy document changes do not come often. The last one was a year ago, I believe, when we had the new time rules. It is just, I don't know, this ruling in particular seems so messed up and just only benefits cheaters. I think back to sort of the same interaction where if you have a Cosmo Psychic monster and you have a rivalry of Warlords face on the field, technically to banish that Cosmo Psychic, to special summon a Cosmo Machine, they have to have another Cosmo Psychic in their hand, but you can't verify that, and that's always how it was ruled. I think that's why this one is being ruled this way now, but it creates some other awkward situations, like if you Artifact Lancio and your opponent activates Invocation, they no longer have to reveal their hand to prove that they can't fusion summon, you just have to take their word for it. This is a rule that only works if you assume that all of your opponents aren't scummy players, and as someone who goes to a lot of tournaments, the vast majority, like probably 98% of Yu-Gi-Oh players are not scummy players, not scummy people, but that 2% or that 1%, they're going to get you on this, and I think for players that are thinking of playing Mind Crush, this is a real deterrent. I don't think Mind Crush is going to see much play anymore. A huge aspect of the card was seeing your opponent's hand just from a gameplay standpoint, so not only do you not get that advantage like you used to be able to, kind of like I made an entire video about, which I'll probably have to put like a pinned comment on that video now. Not only can you not get that knowledge, also your opponent just gets the free chance to just cheat you completely. Hopefully they don't do that. Most of the time they won't do that, but are you willing to take the risk? If your opponent's a scummy player, you can't call a judge on them. You just have to assume that they're not trying to cheat you. That's a pretty awkward situation to get into. But anyway, those are the 6 huge changes on these policy documents. There are hundreds of other changes on these policy documents, much more minor ones, but if you want to go through them, which I highly suggest, I'll put a link in the description to that original article. Anyway though, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.